Let's hear it again. Good evening, everyone. There we go. We're here. It's a beautiful night to be on Columbia Point. I'm Rachel Floor, Executive Director of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, and on behalf of all of my library and foundation colleagues, I am delighted to welcome all of you who are watching this evening's program online, as well as all of you who are here with us tonight. I'm so pleased to acknowledge the generous support of our underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forums, lead sponsors, Bank of America and the Lowell Institute, as well as the Mass Cultural Council and our media sponsor, the Boston Globe. We also want to thank our neighbors at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for their partnership on this evening's program. To open, I humbly begin with a land acknowledgement to recognize that the land on which we stand was once stewarded by Indigenous peoples. Our institution preserves history, makes history accessible, and challenges all Americans to engage in the civic opportunity and struggle of helping the nation grow ever closer to the noblest ideals of its founding. As we work toward that mission, I invite all of us to learn more about and learn more from our nation's history, including Indigenous history, and contemplate how to honor and steward the land that each of us inhabits. We look forward to a robust question and answer period this evening. You'll see full instructions on screen for submitting your questions via email or comments on our YouTube page during the program. We invite those of you who are joining us in person to proceed to the aisle microphones with your questions when that portion of the evening begins. I'd also want to take a moment to ask everyone in the room to silence your cell phones for us. Tonight, we gather to honor the 100th anniversary of Robert F. Kennedy's birth. This night has a special meaning for me. My very first job out of college was with the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Organization in Washington, D.C., which works to realize RFK's dream of a more just and peaceful world. It was there that I was introduced to the RFK brand of public service, rooted not in politics, but in a relentless commitment to standing up for our common humanity. This idea lit a spark in me that has shaped my entire career. I'm guessing that there are many of you in this room who can say the same, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity tonight to explore some of the lessons we can draw from the life and legacy of Robert F. Kennedy on the centennial of his birth. I'm now delighted to introduce tonight's speakers. It's my honor to welcome Chris Matthews back to the library this evening. He is the acclaimed New York Times bestselling author of Bobby Kennedy, A Raging Spirit, Jack Kennedy, Elusive Hero, Kennedy and Nixon, The Rivalry That Shaped Post-War America, and Hardball, How Politics is Played, Told by One Who Knows the Game. Chris was a presidential speechwriter and top aide of the Speaker of the House, Thomas P. Tip O'Neill, Jr. For a generation, he hosted Hardball with Chris Matthews on MSNBC, which is now exclusively on Substack. His new book is Lessons from Bobby, 10 Reasons Robert F. Kennedy Still Matters, and he has kindly agreed to sign copies of it after tonight's program, and you can purchase them at our bookstore that's available, where it's available for sale.
If it's a long read for you, get beyond the comic books. You can read this one.
So please check out our bookstore if you haven't already. It is also a pleasure to welcome Kimberly Atkins-Storr, our moderator for this evening, back to the library. She is a senior opinion writer and columnist for the Boston Globe with more than 20 years of experience covering politics, policy, and law. She's an on-air political analyst for MSNBC, a frequent panelist on NBC's Meet the Press, and co-host of the popular Politicon legal news podcast, #Sisters-in-Law. She has previously reported for WBUR and served as the Boston Herald's Washington bureau chief. And before launching her journalism career, she was a civil trial and appellate litigation attorney in Boston. Please join me in welcoming our special guests.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that introduction. And I just want to jump right into this book with you, Chris.
Thank you.
You know, when I saw the title of the book about lessons from Robert F. Kennedy, one thing I thought of when I think of him is the idea of empathy. I've been thinking about empathy in our leaders a lot lately, or the lack thereof. And the first vision that comes to my head when I think of Bobby Kennedy is when he was campaigning down in the Mississippi Delta, and he came across this family, the Dillard family, a bunch of little kids. I think it was 7 or 8, probably the size of his own family at that time.
Yeah.
And the first question he asked when he sees these kids is, why aren't you in school? And one said, well, we don't go to school, we're not enrolled. And then he asked what they'd eaten that day, and it was only a slice of bread and a bit of honey for each of them. That was the only meal that they had, and he cupped their cheeks in his hand and you know, caressed their heads and laid his hands on their shoulders, and you could see in that, that wasn't a baby kissing moment for a politician. That was someone who felt deeply the pain, that knowing that there was that kind of inequality in America. And I sort of want to start with that, with a couple of lessons in your book. One is pursue ideals and uphold human rights. But one thing that I learned in your book is that that was not always Robert Kennedy's lodestar. He didn't always think that way. Talk a little bit about how he came to that public display of empathy.
Well, a lot of it's about growth. John Lewis thought he grew a lot. And John Lewis, the former congressman who I knew and you know, and he watched him grow. I think and bringing it home to his family, his kids were, you know, all the milk you want to drink. You know, they had very healthy lives. He went back to the family after being in the Delta and raged at the kids, saying, you don't know how lucky you are. I mean, they were elite kids, but he had just seen people that were desperate, as you say, eating a piece of bread a day. And it was really, I think the Kennedys, it started in West Virginia, but I think they did let people know about poverty in the country, white, black, whatever poverty. They were really aware of the people who lived in the hills and in the Delta, where most people don't, it's not even flyover country. Nobody occurs to them that those people live down there. There was another case of empathy, which I thought was interesting. He was very proud of himself after fighting with Ross Burnett of Ole Miss. You know, obviously the SEC schools, anybody who follows football, which everybody does, they're integrated. Those schools are integrated. It was Bobby Kennedy who integrated those schools. I mean, a lot of those white kids down there would be the last person to say Bobby Kennedy did it, but he did. James Meredith's statues on the land, on the campus at Ole Miss, and it was because of Bobby. And Governor Barnett of that state said, that boy is never going to come to Ole Miss. That's how the people talked. He talked in those days. The other thing, when he got James Baldwin, one of the most great intellectuals of our country, together with a lot of other incredibly intellectual African Americans at the Kennedy apartment on Central Park South, he thought he thought they're going to praise him, and he was that I'm going in there to be everybody's going to love me because I'm good with blacks and everything. No, they didn't. They gave him hell. But they said they had a young guy in that group who had been a freedom rider, who had been beaten up by local police and all. And he gave Kennedy hell. He said, look, if they come to get me to go fight in Vietnam, I'm going to pull a gun on them. And Kennedy couldn't believe that. He said, what? How can anybody be so unpatriotic? And then, once again, he starts thinking about it, and he goes, if I were that kid, and if I were living in his shoes, walking in his shoes, I'd be like him. And he starts to think like that. And it was a big part of his life is trying to understand, even Nikita Khrushchev during the Cuban Missile Crisis, trying to figure out the other person's situation and way of life. And he did it with the Vietnam War. He did it with civil rights. He was always learning. And I think empathy is people feel it toward him too. You know, his dad called him the runt of the litter. Now, that's not the nice thing to say to a kid, that you're the shortest guy in the crowd. All your brothers are 6 foot and better looking than you and have a happy life, you know. It's like, this is how he was treated by the old man. And it was tough. And Arthur Schlesinger, the great historian, said, you know, a lot of people felt that Bobby needed looking after. He was vulnerable. And he was, in the end, vulnerable, obviously. And Jack never seemed to need any protection. He was immutable. He was untouchable. So Bobby always struck people. And I think today people a little younger than me especially feel about Bobby a sense of he needs us too. We have to look out for him because he's the kind of guy that gets pushed around. But look out when it came to him fighting the mobsters, Giancana and those guys, and the guy hung people on hooks. These were guys on the waterfront, not the Godfather. These were the real bad guys, Lee J. Cobb and people like that. They were really tough, and he wasn't afraid of them. I don't understand exactly why he wasn't afraid of them, because he looked down Jimmy Hoffa's face and he just dared him to be who he was. It was interesting stuff.
Yeah. So when you were talking book, which is Heal the Divide, so my other memory of Bobby Kennedy that comes to mind is the night of Martin Luther King's assassination, when he kept calm a shocked crowd of mostly Black supporters while he was on the campaign trail. Healing the divide is something that is desperately needed in this moment. Can you talk a little bit about how he did that and what leaders of today can learn from it?
I think he was fascinating because you're getting at it. There's something. He wasn't a bleeding heart liberal. He wasn't like that. He was an Irish cop. He believed in law and order. He used the phrase law and order when he campaigned. You wouldn't think of a liberal doing that today, but he believed in law and order. And against the bad guys and people that break the law, Blacks who burnt down 14th Street in Washington. He was with Carrie, his daughter, and he said, "This has got to stop. This is wrong. This is the wrong way to react to King being killed, burning your own hood down." And he did that. I think he when he walked into Indianapolis the night the King had been killed. I mean, he had spent the day. He'd been campaigning at Notre Dame and other places in Indiana. It was the independent primary, and he asked the people with him, John Lewis, mentioning him again. He's the one that set up that event, and he asked Lewis, "What should I say?" And when he gets to the corner of the neighborhood to go into this neighborhood, it's a Black neighborhood, and I guess it was a little dangerous, he thought, and that night especially. And he goes, the cops stopped going with him. All of a sudden he looks behind him and there's no shotgun guard. There was no escort. He was going in alone. And he got on the top of the truck. He was standing on a truck like politicians do, stand on trucks and talk to people. And he was on the top of the truck, and I dug it up from the NBC microphones. He asked the host, "Do they know yet?" And they didn't know, because this is before social media and cell phones, and you had to wait for the evening news to find out what happened that day. And he had to begin this speech with an incredible first sentence. He said, "I have to tell you that Dr. Martin Luther King was shot and killed today." And he said, "By a white guy." Right in the beginning. And I don't know what that face-to-face was like. I mean, he was, as you say, he was calm himself. And he had a moral confidence he could actually deliver that message. But then he gave that incredible speech. And he talked about, for the first time and last time of his life, a member of my family was killed. And I thought this was odd at the time, by a white guy. Well, what's the relevance of that? Because white guy killing white guy is not a racial thing or tribal thing. It's a murder. But I think he was trying to say, I know what suffering is. I know what this feels like to you, because I've been through this. He had devoted his whole adult life to his brother. And it was a religious thing to him. He couldn't believe God had let him down. And I think he was trying to say, I've been through what you're going to go through now. But it was, it's not just facing the enemy down, it was facing your allies. But they never, and Indianapolis never erupted. They never had trouble there. But they did it in so many major cities.
Yeah, that's really incredible. Well, how do we get back there? What lessons can we take from that in the leaders that we have today and the leaders of the future?
Well, we have a president that stirs it up. I mean, everything he does is racial. Everything. It's whether it's Mexicans. If we had Dutch people coming in across the border, he wouldn't have raised a concern. The DEI thing is a racial thing. The campus thing about affirmative action is all race. It's just what he deals in. It's his formula for success. That's what he does. He stirs it up. And
So how,
it's
I mean, it's
bad.
political capital. The president has used divisions, racial divisions, immigration divisions, political divisions as political capital, and other Republicans have joined in. So with that being so valuable and showing no sign of abating,
Well,
I wonder why people would get into politics right now.
I don't get it either. We can talk about that with the question and answer, but I don't live in the bubble. I have two brothers who voted for him, and one's furious at him because of Ukraine and what he's allowed through his inaction to go on there. And but the other one is still a country club guy who goes with it all the time. I'm for Trump, and all my friends are for Trump. That's what he says all the time. And all my friends, I don't care about your friends. Why are you for Trump? But it's everybody. And my cousins are working class guys. They don't go to college or even think about going to college, or their kids don't think about going to college. And that rift between college and non-college is new. It's the first time it's merged into politics, and people are voting that way. If you didn't go to college, if you're a fireman or maybe a cop, you're probably voting for Trump. And it's just something we live with. At the Thanksgiving table, people are going to see the reality of it. I have a brother-in-law. We don't talk about Trump. In fact, I brought a friend of mine in from Brooklyn to fight with him because I didn't want to have a family fight. I know it'll be a fight. And my friend from Brooklyn is verbally aggressive, and he loves to fight. So the family doesn't have a dispute. It's just we're watching it. It's fun. But it's all over. If you have a normal family, you have points of view that are different.
Yeah.
Maybe up here in Massachusetts, it's all one thing. But I think normally Americans...
It's not.
There we go. Good. I'm glad I aroused everybody. It's not like that in the country. It's a civil war in families. But I got off on Trump. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, who needs the Lions and the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, right? When you have each other. So you mentioned Ukraine.
Yeah.
And one of the lessons you write about is seek peace. Why is seek peace?
Yeah, I think the things that I discovered, first of all, just to answer a broad answer about Bobby Kennedy's significance and why I'm talking about him here at his brother's building. Mm-hmm. Everything that Jack did, and I wrote books about both these guys, when Jack ran for the United States Senate against Henry Cabot Lodge, he had an advantage. The Irish were coming up, the Italians. There were a lot of Catholics that wanted to have a Catholic senator. I understood it was rolling in their direction, but Lodge was very popular with the Irish. And he was very beloved. He was a real statesman. But when he would go to a bar, it was like, oh, he came to our bar. Like, that was like a big deal. The Irish said, well, the other guy came to our bar. Yeah, but he's one of us. It doesn't matter. But it mattered when Henry Cabot Lodge. And Lodge was the guy who got elected, Dwight Eisenhower nominated and elected president in 1950. He went over to Paris and talked him into running and got him to run. And the Democrats had already tried to get Ike to run on their side. So he was quite a figure. He was quite a figure. Jack saw, Kenny O'Donnell knew that Bobby was working down at the Justice Department, working his way up at $4,000 a year, a lawyer, a prosecutor, developing a career on his own. And he went to Jack and said, you need Bobby to run this campaign to deal with the old man. We want the old man's money, but we don't want him getting involved in the campaign because he didn't know anything about politics, nothing. He thought Adlai Stevenson was going to kill Eisenhower. He didn't know anything about it. And Bobby ran that campaign, and Jack said everybody hated Bobby, but at the end of the campaign, they said he knew it was the best organization ever in the state of Massachusetts. I worked for Tip for all those years. He referred to it as the Kennedy Party. It wasn't even the Democratic Party. It was the Kennedy Party. They had their own ways of doing things. And in 1960, did it again. We got Kennedy elected. The letters from Jackie to him were unbelievable. Jackie said, you made the impossible possible. You made it happen. And then, of course, he did all the work on civil rights and pushed Jack on giving the great civil rights speech he gave in June of '63 when he actually went on television and advocated and said that it's as old as the scriptures and as American as the Constitution. We have to deliver. Martin Luther King said afterwards, that white man has just hit it out of the park. He couldn't believe that he gave that speech. And that was Bobby doing that. And it was Bobby during the Cuban Missile Crisis that he didn't know about Bay of Pigs. Jack didn't bring him in on the Bay of Pigs, which was a disaster. But right after the Bay of Pigs, Bobby said, next time we have to fight, they're going to have missiles there. The Russians are going to put missiles in that country, and we're going to have to deal with them. And that's what happened in 62, in October of 62. The missiles were there, and that time he came in as a hawk. He said, let's bomb the hell out of them. And he thought, well, if there's so many Russians there, and if we start killing Russians in an air attack, they're going to grab Berlin. And we're going to have to fight for Berlin because we can't afford to lose Berlin, West Berlin. And he thought, no, we got to go with the sanctions. We got to go with an embargo. And he thought it through. He was always there. Lyndon Johnson, who did not like Bobby Kennedy, said, if whatever Jack Kennedy decides, it was his brother, first one in the room, the last one in the room, who told him what to do. It was Bobby. And so he had that incredible role with his brother. And I think that's a big answer to most of the questions, that he was the man behind the scenes.
So he was his brother's attorney general. And you talk a lot, as you said, he was a law and order man. He, as a senator, always greeted the Capitol Police. You have a connection.
He said hello to the Capitol Police every day he came in, and the other snooty Democratic liberals never said hello to the cops. I mean, I didn't like that. I was a cop, so I thought, I liked the fact that he said hello to us in the morning. And it was an engineer who told me about it. They were just hanging around one night. He said, the only one that used to say hello to the cops in the morning was Bobby. And I thought, that's so wonderful. It's truly wonderful. And
yeah, so as someone who studied law right here in Boston, practiced law right here in Boston, I do believe in law and order. I also believe in the rule of law. These are traits that Bobby Kennedy held dear. What do you think he would think about the current state of the rule of law?
Well, let me go. This is a rich melon of opportunity. Bobby, when he did believe in civil rights, he became a believer. There's no doubt about it. But initially, all these actions, like the Freedom Riders, there was a court decision that says if you're riding on a bus or a train between states, interstate commerce, you cannot practice discrimination. There cannot be, and I went to Chapel Hill for a year in grad school after Holy Cross. I got to tell you that they were still there, the white and colored bathrooms and waiting rooms, and the whole thing was still going on in the Carolinas. He gradually became a big believer in the Freedom Riders. That was a court order. It was a court order for James Meredith. James Meredith did everything right applying for a job, for a position at Ole Miss. I mean, he put all the applications together. He went to the Justice Department. He said, just give me all I want are my rights. It was amazing how clear and perfect he was. And Bobby's Justice Department got behind him and against the governor. And the same thing with Wallace in Alabama. These were court orders. Now, today we have a president who gives orders to Pam Bondi, who follows the orders. Whether it's Bill Clinton, we got to investigate Epstein and Larry Summers and all. Well, let's go after some Democrats to slow down the release of the papers, I think. The same thing, he basically does what Letitia James or James Comey. This is all the orders of the president. This is like the early Soviet Union where the dictator just tells people, prosecute that person. I always wondered how late did the Soviet Union get that way? Was it still that way with Nikita Khrushchev where he wanted somebody killed, he kills them? I think Khrushchev is much more complicated than that. But I think this president acts like a dictator. He's Mussolini. He's got his chin out. And he's ridiculous. And he's using his powers by telling his cabinet, we got a unitary government here, do what I tell you to do. He says the same thing to Mike Johnson. Sunday morning, he was against release of the Epstein papers. Sunday night, he was for the release. The Republicans in the House and the Senate snapped too, just like little robots. Explain that to me, why they all changed within a few minutes, just because he changed his mind. He was a king. He is a king to those people. That's how our democracy doesn't work. I don't know about Amy Coney Barrett. I'm hoping. Believe it or not, she's our hope. I'm sorry, she is our hope. We were going to get 5-4 on anything. It's her. And Notre Dame, let's go. We gotta believe in her, I'm sorry. Old school tie. I mean, it's our hope, really, right now. And I don't think on abortion, I can understand her background, but I do not understand why she would be wrong on the 14th Amendment or on running for a third term. Somebody they have to have a prior review and make it clear. Just say, this guy's not running again. Stop talking about it.
Yes.
Stop talking about it.
I agree with that.
It just gets into people's heads,
I mean, that's an important point.
By the way, why did he leave office in 2020 if he didn't lose? That's my favorite question. Why'd you leave? Why'd you pull stakes up, tell them, well, we got to get out of here? Why did we have to get out of here if you didn't lose? They lost. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah. The point you make is an important one, though, because I was talking to a friend of mine, well-educated person, who asked me, well, who do you think is going to run against Trump in 2028? And I said, nobody. Nobody's going to run. He is a lame duck president, but she's like, yes, I know, but he breaks all the other rules. I said, no, just by saying that is a capitulation, that is a concession that no American citizen should be making to him.
So we got to start acting like we run the country,
That's
but
right.
the voters do. And they're going to prove it next year.
That's absolutely right.
30 seats. This is a change election. This is not a hold election. Nobody's in the mood to hold. It's a change election. We'll see.
So speaking of the word concede, one of your lessons from Bobby Kennedy is learn to concede. Now, if my history serves me well, Bobby Kennedy didn't lose many elections.
He lost Oregon, though. He lost Oregon.
Yes.
And it was a big shock. He went into Oregon running as a guy against the war. He wanted basically what Walter Cronkite wanted, which was, by the way, Walter Cronkite encouraged him to run. That was a little secret at the time. He also wanted the money being spent on the war to go to the cities. Under the Kerner Commission, that's what we had to do. To avoid having a white and a black country, we had to bring them together by spending some money in the cities. And Bobby wanted to do that. When he knew he was going to lose in Oregon in the primary there because of a couple reasons. Some are his fault. He didn't get into the fight against Johnson until the day before St. Patrick's Day, March 16th. Gene McCarthy got in that race in November of '67, and he was a very successful candidate. I loved Gene McCarthy. And he had the college kids. The better educated people. He had rounded them up very early in that fight. And Bobby knew when he started to talk to factory workers, his campaign theme wasn't working, taking money to the cities and helping minorities. So he could tell it was coming. And then the vote came, and he lost, and he had to give a concession speech, and he did it really well. Pat Buchanan, of all people, Pat from the other side, and I know Pat, was in the audience, and he said he could not believe that Bobby was so impressive in accepting defeat, that he said he could not have looked better if he had won. Pat had some heart about this. I think he rooted for some of these guys on the other side, Bill O'Reilly and all, they like Bobby, because Bobby had guts, and he could face up to reality. I don't think anybody should run for office, anybody who isn't ready to acknowledge defeat. Because in the world that I lived in when I was in the Peace Corps over in Africa, and I have to tell you, I was thrilled to be from a real democratic society where we actually have honest elections. We didn't have these ridiculous elections like you get in Zimbabwe, where every time you lose an election, the other side stole it. And every time you win an election, you arrest them all. This is what Trump has brought us to. If you lose, you blame it on cheating. And if you win, you start arresting people. I mean, it's awful. He is taking us to a developing democracy. He's taken us way back. This one person's done this. I don't think anybody else thought about it, but Stop the Steal was January 6th. And those cops, I'm telling you, those cops I knew them. They were working guys, MPs, former military. When they saw those people racing into the building and with anger on their faces, they saw their own crowd, the ones they grew up with. And it's the only explanation why 4 of them committed suicide afterwards. There was something shattering about seeing the faces of your fellow countrymen, your compatriots, coming to kill you. They were jamming flagpoles into them. It was horrible. And who started that? Donald Trump. I'm sorry, it's the worst thing he ever did, I think. And it's hard to put that together, but I think it was the worst thing he ever did.
So I want to bring this out to a bigger picture now. I grew up at a time knowing the Kennedy mystique, you know, the name, the family. That name stood for something.
Did you grow up here?
I'm sorry?
Up here?
No, I grew up in Detroit. I came here in '95 to go to law school 30 years ago, oh my gosh. But my stepchildren, who were in their early to mid-20s, they barely remember the Obama administration, right? Younger people don't have the same sense of what the name Kennedy means, save the current Secretary of Health and Human Services.
I agree. My kids are pretty well read, but
it's just different. So how do you're writing this book about what Bobby Kennedy means. Is that harder now to convey to younger people who don't? I learned from my mother. My mother remembers the night that Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. She was at home with my sister who was a newborn. How do you convey the importance? Why should younger people, particularly those aspiring in politics, care about this?
Well, I think that's a general question about remembering people of quality and who they were and how they acted with other people. And the Mount Rushmore, I mean, any reference to people with their imperfect records that we look up to. I remember, all I can tell you is telling the story, because John Lewis said, when we lost John Kennedy, I said, well, we still have Martin Luther King. And then we lost Martin Luther King. And he said, well, we still have Bobby. And then we lost Bobby. And he said, I can't imagine living without him. So there were people on the inside of government and on the outside with King who were actually doing the job of changing the country, who really did the good work. I mean, Martin Luther King's speech in '63 may be one of the two greatest speeches, if not the greatest speech ever delivered. And he did that when somebody, tell him about the dream, Martin, you know. He wasn't telling that speech until somebody yelled from the crowd, tell him about the dream.
Like in church, when you say, yes.
And he did, that's when he reached the sort of biblical level of power. He conveyed, it was like Lincoln's great speech, the second inaugural, which he did right before he died, which you should go look at the Lincoln Memorial. It's when he talks about the terrible punishment this country was going to endure because of slavery. What's taken from the lash will be paid for in blood. I mean, the idea that made the Civil War made sense, because we just lost 600,000 white guys. What was that over? It was over slavery, and we paid for it in that war. And that's something that you hear from the right guy who wrote that speech. There was no speechwriter for Lincoln, like there was no speechwriters for Winston Churchill. The great people can write their own. And those two, I think Dr. Martin Luther King speech in August of '63 and the Lincoln address right before he was killed. By the way, we have a lot of violence in this country, which I think we should mention. We have a history of violence, which is, I mean, we're worse than the Latin American banana republic. We have horror in our history. I mean, it's Lincoln, it's Garfield, it's McKinley. FDR was shot at a couple of times. Teddy Roosevelt was shot at. People tried to kill Harry Truman. John Kennedy was killed. Jerry Ford was shot twice. I mean,
Reagan.
Trump was shot. I mean, it's what other country lives like this, you know? And the fact that the two Kennedys were killed is not surprising. They both came out for civil rights. Bobby thought that he'd be killed first. After Jack was killed, he said, I thought it was me. I thought they'd get me first because of all the anger against him in the South. It's really a frightening country if you think about it. It's the Wild West. Everybody's got a gun. But, you know, it's something we sort of pass on to the next topic. But it's real. And I think violence is maybe in our future right now. It may well be in our future.
So Speaking of that, a couple more questions from me before I will start taking questions from the audience. The final lesson in your book is about sacrifice, which in my lifetime, there was a time that you could not even think about running for the presidency if you hadn't had military service or if you had not given back to your country. I mean, the Kennedy family, they've sacrificed more than most. But why is sacrifice important
Well, I think
to you?
the history of that family was, the sons were different than the father. The father didn't believe in World War II or anything. He was on the wrong side. Joe Jr., if you read about the mission he was on, to fly his plane over continental Europe and aim it down towards the V2 sites, which Hitler's last strategy was this V2 rockets, and then bail out after you push the button to have the plane. It was so hairy. It was so impossible to succeed. Imagine it working. I mean, if he pulled this off. And he was, and then Jack killed, and then Bobby killed. And I mean, with all the problems of Ted's life, part of it is that he had this internal reality of, my God, I can be knocked off any moment. And the feeling for his brothers was so real. So real. And where are we going on this? I don't know where we're going on this. I don't know where we're going.
But the idea of sacrifice.
Oh, the sacrifice. I mean, Bobby, he had to campaign in the toughest neighborhoods in Los Angeles to try to get the vote out with blacks and Hispanics, and he had to win. The intellectuals were all with McCarthy. And after losing in Oregon, he had to win California. He said, I'm going to debate the guy, and he debated him and actually won the debate, according to the public. He said, if I lose this election in California, I'm quitting. Pretty strong statement. I'll give McCarthy Secretary of State. I'll offer it to him if he could talk him out of it, running again, keeping it up. He had a long race. He was, you know, as someone, Jack Newfield, a great columnist for the New York paper, said he spent his life with the wealthy, with movie stars, celebrities, astronauts, mountain climbers, financiers, and he died reaching for the hand of a $75 a week Mexican-American dishwasher. That's how he lived. And Schlesinger said he must have known how it was going to end, this campaign, the way he was campaigning, the risks he were taking, having his shoes taken off and things like that, and not just cufflinks. All the clothes were, people were grabbing clothes off him. And he said, if I don't get close to people and let them touch me, they're not going to believe in me. Because listening speeches, he said, is not working enough. I got to let people be touching me. It was like a bullfighter. He was so close to danger, and he knew he was doing it. That's what happened.
Yeah.
It's a horrible thing.
Both in your book, I thought it was poignant that you both wrote about he understood the need for the public to touch him. Yeah. But he also knew the need to touch the public, as he did in the Mississippi Delta.
He was not a limousine liberal.
Yeah.
He was not like that. He was the real thing. And the people that knew him, whether it's Harry Belafonte, who I got to know, he was the real thing. And John Lewis, of course, and people like that who knew him and could see through him, and they could see if there's another Paul here working. They didn't see a Paul, they saw him. And that's why I want him to be remembered. And I don't want people thinking about his kid and all that. That's a different story. I think it's a totally different story. And I think, you know, we went to see Ethel before she died up in Hyannis, and the rule was, the nurse said, who was taking care of her, said 20 minutes and don't bring up her son. That's the real world. I mean, I give you the real world tonight. I mean, I'm not giving you some other baloney. It's the real world. And that whole family, Carrie and Rory and Douglas and Kathleen, they don't talk down on their brother, but you can tell what's going on. They're not proud of this situation. And I don't think he would be. I remember when Bobby was dying, and it took him about a day and a half to die at the Good Samaritan Hospital in LA. And we knew it was happening all day. Everybody knew he was dying. And Bobby Jr. was crying. He was 14 years old. He was crying like a good kid would be. And I called him up after I finished this book, and I said, I don't know, he has no idea how I got the phone number, but I got a hold of him, and I said, I wrote a book about your dad. It's very positive. I don't mention you. No controversy, so I'm going to leave it at that. It's all true.
All right, I could do this all day, but I know you all have questions. There are 2 microphones that are up there. I just have a few requests, is that you ask questions rather than comments. And there are a lot of people both in the room and online who have questions. So brevity is our friend tonight. So if you could keep them brief, I would deeply appreciate it. There's another mic on this side too. So go ahead, hello.
Hello, Gloria Brown Marshall, and I came up here from New York just for this. But my question has to do with religion. During the time period of the Kennedys, the major controversy was the fact they were Catholic and what role that would play in the running of the country. And now we seem to have evangelicals and religious fingerprints on a lot of what we're doing. What do you think Bobby Kennedy's reaction would be, or what is your reaction to the role of religion in politics today?
I believe what Jesus said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. I think we can imagine the distinction and stick to it. I think it's no prayer in school, public school. I think it's logical. Where do you think it's going to get into our policy? Where do you think the evangelicals are going to start? Well, they're very pro-Israeli, I know. In sort of a strange way, when you're over there, you keep thinking, why are they so big on Israel? But they are. They think of it as, in biblical terms, they think of it as the Old Testament. And it becomes to them the current reality. I don't know what the relationship is between the Old Testament and today.
Well, there's a difference between the evangelical political machine and the evangelical religious and moral machine. Those are two.
Some of those guys are offensive. I know them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know it's what you wanted to hear, and I just delivered
no,
it. I gave you the full-throated response.
I thank you.
Yes.
I thank you, and I appreciate the book, and thank you for reminding us so we have these ancestors to look back on to give us the courage we need to go forward. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
I don't think Jack Kennedy played up his religion. I know that he was asked to respond on religious matters, and he would say, I'm not from the church. I don't represent the church, and I'm not going to speak that way. I'm not going to answer questions like that. I think he's sort of like Obama. He was very dignified in the way he presented his background, and he wasn't going to talk as some sort of cartoon character. He wasn't going to be what you wanted him to be. He wanted to be himself, and I think both those gentlemen were very careful about how they presented themselves.
Thank you. I want to drill down a little bit more on the point you've made about the evolution of Bobby Kennedy, which I think is a through line for greatness for at least people I consider great. You mentioned King's keynote address, the March on Washington. Shortly after that, J. Edgar Hoover said, this is the most dangerous Negro in America. Bobby Kennedy signs off on Hoover having round-the-clock surveillance for the rest of King's life on one side, but then on the other side, you have that, as you talked about, the 1968 speech in Indianapolis. So you could just walk us through that evolution, because those are kind of polarities, if you would.
Well, I mean, I lived through that. I was around. My classmates are from Holy Cross here tonight. We've all lived through that. We went to grad school and law school, and we know all about that period. It was not some distant memory to us. It's what we grew up with. and our maturity, we were facing it. And I think the term, Bobby once said, I didn't lose a lot of sleep over Negroes, which was a proper term back in the early 60s and 50s.
When he was younger, you said.
I think that Jesse Jackson really brought about the notion of, say, African Americans. That's a proper way of calling people. And so he grew up in that era under Eisenhower, which not much was done under civil rights. 57 bill wasn't a strong bill. It didn't look like it was going to work. So as he and his brother pulled history faster than it would have gone a little bit. I think he pushed it, and they were being pushed themselves. King was pushing them, James Baldwin was pushing them from the outside of government. They were inside government. And I don't know what sparked Jack Kennedy to actually give that speech. And I've dug up what he was doing in the Congress. He was calling people up like Dick Daley, trying to get a couple of votes on Rules Committee and places like that. He was struggling, vote by vote, when he got killed, to get this thing passed. And it was work. And they had this, when I went to Capitol Hill in 1971, still the Southerners ran the place. All the chairmanships were Southern. They ruled everything. The cooking was Southern. It was all grits and stuff. I mean, it was real. It was a Southern restaurant in the Longworth building. It was. And these guys were the bosses, and you couldn't question it. I mean, Joe Biden got in trouble for saying he had to deal with these guys like Eastland and people then. They were the bosses, and under the seniority system, they were always going to be the bosses. They got those jobs by appointment. When somebody died in the South, they named a new senator. Yep. They never got elected, a lot of them. They just stayed there. And they loved it. They acted like senators. They were good at it.
The filibuster was created as a tool to protect the Southern Senate voters. It was not a tool. I learned in school that it was supposed to be to encourage consensus. No, it was to allow the Southern delegation to block civil rights legislation.
And why we have the Senate is 2 senators per state. I mean, if you're from Alaska or Vermont or someplace, a small state of a small population, you have as much clout as the senator from LA or New York. Or it's just the way that keeps the little states happy. And I understand why you want to have a united country, give them a break. But a lot of it was about the rural vote, the conservative vote, the Southern vote.
Yeah.
I can just tell you, like most of us in this room have evolved on race and a lot of other issues. We have gone a distance from the 60s, from the 50s. We have evolved. And it's human nature to do that. If you're thinking, you're making decisions based on new information. That's frightening. and who you know. Look, most of it's who you know. It comes down to who you know personally. That's how you make decisions. So I think Bobby had good company with John Siegenthaler and people like that. There were really good people in his crowd. From John Siegenthaler from when he got hit on the head down there in Montgomery, Bobby sent him along to watch the Freedom Riders. And Bobby was telling, tell them to get off the buses. I don't think that's going to work. This is just going to cause international trouble. He was trying to stop the movement. And then Siegenthaler was with the Freedom Riders heading down to Montgomery. And there's a white riot down there. And they got a hold of him and pounded him on the head with some metal object. And he's lying in the street. The cops are letting him lie in the street. And Bobby saw that as, wait, this is justice. This is the way our justice works. We let my guy lie in the street. And that's when John Lewis and Harry Belafonte and all those guys said, wow. It was when Bobby's buddy, Siegenthaler, his AA, got beat up that he began to take this thing seriously. He had close encounter with the bad guys in the South. And he also saw the white, rabid faces of the white people down there. And the looks on those faces, you can probably get this on YouTube, against James Meredith were amazing. The anger, he realized that Jim Crow was so powerful, these people would die for it. They wanted everything. They said, we don't want blacks going anywhere. Imagine a school like Ole Miss with all white. I mean, there was 15, 20% in the South, in the deep South, it was black. How can you just say you're not coming to this school? How can the governor say you're not coming to the school?
Yeah.
How can George Wallace get away with it? He eventually apologized for his whole career. But it was a very different nature of it up north. But down there, they were just blatant about it. They were white supremacists.
All right, so I'm going to put you to a challenge, Chris. We have about 5 minutes left. We have a lot of questions. We're going to lightning round this.
Limited to 1 minute.
We're going to lightning round this. Go ahead.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for coming. We almost share a birthday by 1 month. My impression first, the day I graduated, driving to my graduation on the radio.
All right, we got to get to the question just because we're almost out of time.
They were chanting goodbye, Barbie. That was my point. My question is, Pope Leo and the Catholic bishops have spoken out against the treatment of immigrants in the face of two prominent Catholics, Tom Homans and J.D. Vance, allegedly. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, you were saying you don't want religious to get involved with politics.
But it's the end of shame, I
Well, what
think.
do you think should be involved? The Pope, what role should he play in our government?
I just think he
No,
has
what do you think his role should be?
to continue to comment.
And to direct our politics?
No, just to
Okay, here's what I think. Bluntly stated, Joe Biden had an open border for 4 years. It was a disaster, and nobody liked it. Chinese were pouring through the borders. It was wrong. And today, since January 20th, the border's been closed. Nobody's complained, not any Hispanic leader. That part of his policy is popular. The deportations of people who have been in this country 20 years, whatever, going around ripping people's lives apart is not popular because it's the way he's treating people. But I think that we need a border policy. I'm sorry, it's an open country, but we need a border policy. And the next president better have one. And if the Democrats don't have a border policy, they'll lose the next election. Because it's terrible what Biden did. I'm sorry, whether it's Ron Claman, I don't know who it was, who said leave the border open for 4 years? What do you think?
Well, it's the way
No, answer my question.
Excuse me?
Answer my question.
Oh,
Who opened the border for 4 years?
as you said, Biden had an open border. My question is, how do we treat the immigrants?
First of all, have you been to a naturalization ceremony? You ever been to one?
No, I have not.
Well, they're unbelievable. They're unbelievable.
I'm sure they are.
They're emotional. They're all people in the room from everywhere in the world, and you're crying. Immigration is wonderful. Illegal immigration, we got to deal with it.
All right,
Okay.
I'm going to go.
Thank you.
We got to deal with it.
I'm going to go to the next
Not by
question.
arresting people, by closing the border appropriately. That's what I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My name's Roger Archibald. I'm from North Quincy, right across the water here. My question is, one of the, I guess, a very broad belief that you hear all the time nowadays is that were it not for an assassin's bullet, Robert Kennedy would have been the next president. Having been someone who lived through that area, I realized it was much more complex than that.
It was.
In your opinion, had it not been for an assassin's bullet, what were his chances of actually being nominated?
Well, I tell you something you could probably agree to. The Democratic Convention in 1968 was a disaster. It cost Hubert Humphrey the election. It was a disaster on television. It was just horrible. The kids were not nice guys attacking the police, and the police were certainly not nice guys attacking the students. It was awful what went on, what they were throwing at the cops, and the cops were brutal. But if Bobby Kennedy was there as a nominee, as a candidate for a nomination, it would have been totally different. It would have been Hubert Humphrey and Johnson secretly in the background, and Bobby Kennedy running for president and the nomination. It would have been a very positive event. It would have been great for the country if he had gotten that far. It's impossible to predict. People say to me, well, he was for Teddy Kennedy to win the nomination after Bobby was killed, so he must have been for Bobby. It's not as simple as that. We didn't have enough primaries in those days to decide this stuff. It was bosses from big cities. And, Humphrey had a lot of support in that crowd. And he didn't have to run. So I think Bobby would have he won California. Going into New York could have been very tricky because New York was a lot like California. A lot of people in there were very loyal to Adlai Stevenson and to Humphrey and that whole crowd. And it wasn't so simple. They liked Gene McCarthy. They really did in New York City. A lot of advertisement for local politicians had McCarthy in the middle. So I think he would have won, but it would not have been easy. And I don't want to predict what Bobby couldn't have predicted. He said, let's go on to Chicago.
Yeah.
That's as far as he got. I have the poster still for that victory night.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. I was going to ask about the trip that Bobby Kennedy and Jack Kennedy, the international trip they took in 1953, I think.
Yeah.
And they both went to Vietnam. And there was somewhere I read that the age difference between them is 8 or 9 years or something.
8 years.
And so Jack Kennedy really didn't have a relationship with his brother
He
until that
didn't enjoy
trip.
his company.
He did not enjoy his company. But it seemed like that
We
trip
called him
brought...
Black Robert. Because he was moody. He was just a moody guy. But you know what happened on that trip that's so interesting? Jack had his problems with Addison's disease, one of the early episodes of Addison's disease. And when it struck him, Bobby immediately said, we got to go to the hospital in Okinawa. He got him to the hospital, the military hospital in Okinawa, and got him treated. And Bobby became, in Jack's eyes, a savior, a guy that's going to look out for his older brother, a guy that you want to have around me. And he began to think of, he had given him the Italian neighborhood in 46. He gave one, we're not going to do too well over here, so I'll put you over there. So he wasn't going to do too well in a very tribal kind of election in 46. And he sent Bobby over there, and Bobby did a pretty good job. He would play baseball with the kids and football and all, and the kids the neighborhood spread the word, this guy's no snooty guy. He's okay. You know, the working people were liked, and they liked Bobby. And he did really well. And then Bobby grew on Jack. And but saving his life in Okinawa was a big deal. I should have put that in the book, but it was a big part of...
It'll be in the next one.
Jean said that it was politics she told me it was politics that brought them together. They weren't naturally buddies, like Jack had his special buddies. He wasn't like that. And he also didn't have Jack's lifestyle, to put it lightly. It wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same guy. They weren't the same guy. So,
right.
But it's a great question. How did they get together? Politics. 52 and 60.
All right, it's unfortunately going to have to be the last question. We're already running a little over. We're sorry for everybody that didn't get them. But.
So to follow on from the last question of Bobby getting elected, assume he does get elected. In your opinion, how good a president would he have been, and would he have been a better president than his brother?
Oh, no, I would never say that. I think Jack Kennedy was one of the people that would like to see on Mount Rushmore. I mean, he was a hero. You have to understand, Jack Kennedy really was a hero before he ran for office. What he did in the South Pacific is it's the subject of greatness. When that PT boat got cut in half by a Japanese destroyer, he got everybody together, the guys that couldn't swim, and a lot of guys in the Navy couldn't swim, he got them on a big plank and made sure they could make it to shore. And then he took the guy with a bad back, Pappy McMahon, and he hung him on his back. And he had a bad back, Jack. Part of it was the collision. He had him on his back for 4 hours as he swam through Japanese waters to save that guy's life. This is a real hero, and it really happened. And people knew about it. It was an act of physical courage in the instant that it mattered. And so I don't think I don't talk about anybody putting him down. I think he was incredible. And I think go watch 13 Days, go watch the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he went from being a troublesome kid in school to being the guy that saved the world. And something else. I mean, he cut that deal with Nikita Khrushchev, who deserves some of the credit for the fact we got through that situation. And Khrushchev said, after it was over, he said, I want to pay tribute to the two. He sent a separate note to Washington and said, I want to thank both those two men that saved us, Bobby and Jack. It really did happen.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the Kennedy Presidential Library, I want to thank everyone who is both present and online for joining us, and please join me in thanking Chris Matthews for this evening.